For the first part of today's Beacon seminar, we have Arend Hintze talking about involving heuristics. For the second part, I'm going to have to introduce the other speaker. It's also Arend Hintze, but different topic. So he's giving a double header. Arend is in the Department of Microbiology and Molecular Genetics and has been working on computational evolution of many different things. Animals and people. He's been here for about 2 years. He's a postdoc in my lab. Before that, he was a postdoc and a research assistant professor later at the Keck Graduate Institute, also where I was. So he's been following me around. I'm trying to get the MSU to understand that they need to hire him on a faculty position, so that basically he doesn't have to follow me, but basically he can just hang out where so in this talk, I have not been involved in this work. It's together with Tim Pleskatch, who is a professor, there he is, in the Department of Psychology, and investigating how people make decisions. The rest of Arend will tell you.
Thank you. So, as you heard, I do evolution of intelligence and Tim does decision making in people. And this work is deliberately set up to be interdisciplinary and create a lot of tension between these fields. And you will see how this develops. Because quite frankly, this fringe between these disciplines is what hopefully creates interesting results. So, look forward for clash. So, heuristics in computer science. And there are lots of examples, but I think one of the better ones is, imagine that you do the traveling salesman problem. The traveling salesman problem means that you have to visit all these dots. You're supposed to take the shortest route, and please only go straight from dot to dot. If you want to know the solution, you have to go through all permutations. There's no shortcut, so to speak. That means you have to do n factorial permutations, which is a lot if you have many nodes. Okay? So the bottom right shows you the solution. As I said, you have to go through this entire enumeration. But there is a known solution for this. There are what's called heuristics that more or less can shortcut your computation. You can use what's called the greedy tour, or the nearest neighbor, or the savings tours. These are all means to create an almost shortest path. But using these things is just good enough, but not perfect. You know that you will not arrive at the perfect solution. That will always remain to be enumerated entirely. You do this because, of course, the entire enumeration is extraordinarily expensive in terms of computational terms, because it takes time, maybe it takes a lot more memory. So when you apply a heuristic in computational terms, then you use something to shortcut a problem. And you already know this is not the perfect way of doing it, but you just live with this. There are more complex examples, in particular examples where you do not know the perfect solution. Chess is one of these things where if you want to know the perfect move, you would need to enumerate all moves of yourself, your opponent, back and forth, until the end of every possible game. That is more than atoms in the universe. So here, suddenly two different types of heuristics happen. One is the typical computational one that lets you allow to prune this tree, this decision tree, much faster. So instead of only seeing into the future for 4 or 5 moves, pruning these trees allows you to see from the future for 10, 11 moves, something like that. So this is the typical heuristic that allows you to shortcut an algorithm. But there's something else in there. Maybe you can teach the computer or a human player to play smart, use a heuristic or a rule of thumb. For example, never put your knight to the border of the board. Never let it pawn hanging, castle, whatever. There are these rules of thumbs that allow you to play better without perfect enumeration. And this is more what we like to get at, because this is sort of a, let's call them psychologically heuristic. This is a rule. There are other rules, and usually all this thing happens in what we call bounded rationality. If you do not have perfect knowledge about what you have to do, well, then you don't know the perfect solution. You have to make do with something you have. Let's say it's a heuristic in this particular case. So, okay, it seems to be important to evolve heuristic. This is in computer science important and in psychology, so let's try to evolve one. That's our made goal here, and let's just jump right into the famous German city problem. This is a problem from psychology, and it works as follows. I ask you Bremen or Kassel, 2 German cities, and of course you answer Bremen because it's the biggest city. AI answer them.
The question is always which one is the biggest?
Which one is the biggest? That is what you have to answer. And I just asked you 1 out of 83 possible cities, and yeah, maybe you know the answer or not, but you have, and the idea is that you have cues about these cities. I mean, I visited some of them, I lived in some of them, maybe you heard about some of them, and so forth. But whatever happens is you query your memory, okay? And there are different ways of querying your memory, and how you query your memory can be done with using heuristics. You can just randomly guess, or you can use different ones that say take the less, take the best. There are lots and lots and lots of different heuristics. Not so important what they are. Important is that you use these things to query memory to come up with a decision in this problem. For me to evolve a strategy or a brain that does this, this problem looks a little bit different. I have a large list of cities, and specifically 83, and each of these cities has a certain cue. So that means that city A can have or not have a soccer team, is the state capital, is in the industry belt, is in an intercity stop, has an exposition, and so forth. So you have these cues, and then you have cues for city B. And what you as the machine should do is you should find an answer based on these cues. Since there are 83 times 82 possible questions, because we never ask you, is Berlin bigger than Berlin, because that doesn't make sense, you have 6,806 possible questions I can ask in this case. Now, of course, we would like to evolve a brain that does that, so we use our hopefully already well-known Markov brains, but let's just wrap up what this is. Markov brains are probabilistic finite state machines that map input to outputs, and if necessary, also use what's called internal states. How does this work? Well, you have logic gates, and you can describe a logic gate with a logic table. For example, this is an OR gate, and this OR gate fires if one of the inputs is 1 or both, and not fires if one of the both inputs are 0. And there are different types of logic gates. The only thing that changes is the table. You can transform logic gates that are deterministic and probabilistic ones by just replacing these numbers with probabilities. And of course, you can write awkward tables, which are called fuzzy logic gates, and not necessarily defining the terms we know. It's like and or, but this is a fuzzy logic gate for some kind of logic. That comes with one advantage. You can make gates that are arbitrarily large. You can have gates that have multiple inputs and multiple outputs. The only thing that changes is the size of the table that's described. For all purposes, I will return back to deterministic logic gates, but however, the idea is the same. So, what you would like to do is you would like to hook up all these gates with each other to perform some kind of functions. And for this, you have to hook up these gates to input nodes, and they have to eventually write into outputs. One caveat though, a gate cannot write into another gate directly, because one gate's output must be written into some node, and that has to be read from another gate. So that's why you also have internal nodes. So hidden nodes, internal nodes, output nodes. We have a genome. This is the long sequence of numbers. We define certain cues as start codons, and a start codon defines the start of the gene. We have genes coding not only the logic table of each of these gates, but also, we have one gene per logic gate, and if you have mutations in these genes, they can change the logic of these gates. And if you have mutations in other areas of the gene, you might change the wiring of these gates. So this genome entirely describes the full machine deterministically. There's no ambiguity. We can have one-to-one mapping. And of course, we can involve these strings, which means that we involve these brains of these gates and other things. Okay. If you want to evolve a heuristic in the German city problem, you'd better be able to evolve the perfect solution. Okay? Otherwise, everybody's like, yeah, you can't solve it because the system can't solve it. So the question right now, the first one is, can we solve this? Can we make a brain that solves the German problem entirely? And the answer is yes, but it's weird, it's strange. You have all these input bits, and you can write down the input bits for a particular question. And of course, each of these particular questions has a particular answer. Well, I can write down a logic statement that goes a little like this. If A1 and not AB and not A2 and B2 and not A3 and not A4 and so forth, then I have one statement for one of these cues, or for one of these cue patterns, and then I can decide whether or not to fire or not, to say A is bigger or B is bigger. Because I can transform this pattern into some kind of logic gate array. That takes forever and requires tons of nodes, but you can do that. What you end up with having is you suddenly it turns out that you can only get 5,200 or something like that right from 6,806 that you'd expect. And say, why the hell? I mean, we programmed the solution, and the solution is not the perfect one. Well, it turns out that certain cities have exactly the same Q pattern, and on top of that, we have several islands that have the same Q pattern, but they are different among each other, and they're also shuffled. Which means that you have to follow one of the Q patterns and count what is the most likely answer that gives you the highest result. If you do that, you arrive at the best possible solution coming from the data set that says 5,348. We have humans can, of course, completely learn this and give correct answers, but if you have this table as Qs, you can't, and this is the best possible thing you can arrive. And we can make a brain and mark brain that does that. Now, the next thing is we would love to evolve heuristics. So the next question is, can we actually implement, let's say, the take the best heuristic. The take the best heuristic is an important heuristic in psychology, and it goes as follows. You have all your Qs, you pick the first Q, and then you check whether or not this Q has the Q or not. So you compare both cities if they have a soccer team. If one of the two cities has the soccer team, you pick the one with the soccer team as the bigger one. If both don't have it or both have it, then you can't distinguish, and then you take the next Q and so forth. So you check the best, the best, the best. The question is now, how do you sort these Qs in order to be optimal? So what we did is, we went through all 36,280 possible permutations of this problem and scored how well each of these permutations is in terms of question. This is the distribution of all of these, and you see that they more or less do well. This is our gray line, that's the highest possible solution. This is the highest, this is the actual possible arrivable maximum fitness. You see this distribution, you see these ticks on there that say there are permutations that perform exceptionally well, but not perfect. And on top of that, there are a couple of heuristics that tell you how you should sort these things. There's something that's called ecological validity, discrimination rate, success rate. It doesn't really matter. The point that I'm making is that none of these is the perfect order. They are all suboptimal for this particular data set. Okay? And whenever you apply this, the best possible result is down here at the end.
These are the probabilities
to find that particular fit.
Using the take the best algorithm.
Yeah, so you take the best for all the permutations and you count the fitness distribution of all these 36,000 machines.
362.
362. Many. By the way, if you would try to apply the take the best heuristic, you would try to find the best one, you would go through all these permutations. Point is, you can't engineer this take the best heuristic. This is a Markov brain implementation of this thing. A little bit goes like this. You have a gate, and this gate takes the first Q. If this Q is informative, it fires an answer. Question mark is the answer bit that you have to turn on or off. If you can't answer, you turn on this little H1 flag. This little H1 flag tells the next gate, hey, you make the decision now. If it can make the decision, it makes the decision. If it can't, it turns on the next flag and propagates to this. So this guy implements the take the best heuristic, and how you wire this describes which of the permutations you're using. So technically, take the best heuristic possible among things. That's not enough. There are other ones, for example, the tallying heuristic, or also called Dawes rule. It's very easy. You just sum over all these input bits. And you pick the one that has most, and if both have the same, you pick city A. Okay. 4 weeks later, this is how we do this. This is not programming, this is etching chips with logic gates, and I've never done that before, and I hope not to do that ever again, but it's possible. You can implement the tallying heuristic with the Markov gate. That's the point. So you can implement lots and lots of different heuristics. So let's come to evolution finally, right? So, by the way, this is Darwin and Simpsons, right? There's also a smiley face, but that's low resolution, so I can't take it. So let's use evolution. Let's take a start genome, a random genome, and just evolve the hell out of it. In fact, what we did is we took 200 independent evolutionary runs and let them evolve to solve the German city problem. What I plot here is the black line is the mean fitness of these things. Keep in mind, the best, highest maximum fitness is not one, it's the perfect solution, it's the possible solution, right? You cannot be better than that with any means, okay? And there's a distribution of solutions, of course, and the red line shows the best possible one we evolved. So, okay, we can get close to the solution. How does this compare to, let's say, take the best or tallying heuristic? This is the score of the take the best and tallying heuristic, and we are mildly better in average, but we have one strategy that's excessively better. So, quotation mark, repeat these two things.
Sorry, does it mean the red line that right from the first generation you had the best solution?
No, no, sorry. This is just showing
There was
the
an
level in
evolution
the
of
last generation. Sorry, this is just showing.
And just take the best as the validity.
This is the one with that, yes. Yeah, because they're also differentiating in that. Okay. Well, the cool thing is I just implemented all these Markov brains that do these heuristics. So what happens if you use these as answers and not as the random genome? Supposedly they are good heuristics, so they should be somewhere in a fitness peak, right? Well, this happens. Well, first of all, they start off at a much higher level, but what you see is that they immediately start evolving away to something that's higher.
Which is also therefore not take the best.
There's this interesting question because we don't know what this is. We also don't know what our strategies are, right? So how do we decompose this? This is a very good question. Well, we have to somehow compare these strategies. And we compare these by comparing their output patterns. So if you have the solution, for example, then you have a very long vector of 686 bits, zeros or ones. And for example, there's the take the best solution. And of course, because you have these long bit strings, you can compute the Hamming distance between them. That gives you a distance measure between two evolved organisms. And you can do this for the take the best ancestor, for the tallying ancestor, or the random ancestor. And of course, you can do this for everything that evolved in this system whatsoever. What we do specifically is we compute the distance between a concrete specific strategy and take the best and the perfect solution, which allows you to put every of these strategies into some space there. The best possible way would be to do principal component analysis, and that just zones out 6,800 dimensions. But this is one way of doing this. Now, because we have a line of descent, we know what organism came after the other. If you would plot one of them, there should be this jagged line, this strategy trajectory, or this solution trajectory. And of course, we have lots of them, so I just show you the mean trajectory of my individual experiments. And this is how this looks like. Our random ancestor starts here. By the way, the distance to the solution is 1 minus the fitness, right? So what you see is that, of course, evolution drives everything to the left of this. This has to be, otherwise there would not be true fitness. But on the y-axis, you have the distance to take the best. That's why the take the best ancestor starts with 0, because he starts out with this strategy, or this solution, and then migrates or moves away in strategy space. This graph tells us that whatever we evolved is not take the best, is not tallying. Tallying is not not our one, and take the best is not our strategy. And they evolved to something over here.
Is there a chance that if you run it long enough that they will all evolve to the same point?
That's possible, yes. The thing is, this guy flattens out here, right? So maybe here's a local fitness peak.
Well, do you know that?
Not for sure, but we can try
It
it.
just takes a very long time.
Yeah. So let's look at what our Markov brain actually does, because I mean, after all, we evolved something, right? And what you see is that this guy is not connecting up to all the input bits, it's actually preferring ones over others. And the rest is fairly cryptic logic, and if I look at others, well, I might see a similar. So what we're doing now is, in order to see if some of these traits matter more than others, we count which of these traits is connecting to one of our gates. If it's an important trait, then gates should connect preferentially more to that one. And if it's a completely irrelevant trait, you should connect randomly to it or not. So this is this plot. This is the total number of connections over 1,000 generations for our random ancestor, and average over our guys, sorry, sum over all of our guys. And you see that they preferentially attach to node 7, which is trait 7, I think that's soccer thing, and then 6 is something else, and 1 is the last. Okay, so our guys prefer these 3 Qs, 7 more than 6, 6 more than 1. Okay, 7 is the only one that we know as a familiar face, because that's the one that is used in the take the best heuristic as the first Q. And then they use something else, not 6, not 1, Okay, long breeding session about this. These are the Qs that have the most information about the answer. If I take Q7, I can predict the answer best. And then I ask, what happens if I take 2 Qs? So I check for all 2 Q pairs, and the Q pair 7 and 6 is the one that contains the most information about the answer. And of course for 3, if I go through all 3 permutations, then it's 7, 6, and 1, which is exactly what these guys pick up. So, I can give you another reason at this. Imagine you take only 1 Q, right? Like the take the best. Then you see that where our zeros and both the zeros and both ones, I cannot make a decision. So in the take the best heuristic, I jump to the next guy. And wherever I can discriminate this, I add things in. But whenever both are zeros or both are ones, I still can't answer. If I use all these 4 bits, if I use Q7 and 6 together, meaning all 4 of these bits, then I can fill in these things, because this pattern is distinct from this pattern, and this pattern is distinct from this pattern. This should give you some intuition why using the mutual information, the information between all these bits, is much more important than using 1 Q after the other Q. On top of that, we already know from Chris's work more or less that evolution always tries to increase information about its environment. This is exactly what these machines do. Okay? Now, the evolutionary principle is obviously increase information about the answer, and this is what these machines end up doing. And evolution optimizes machines to have better about the machines. But one question remains open. Just because I have an evolutionary principle that increases information, that doesn't mean that the brains that are evolved indeed implement a heuristic. After all, these are just quotation machines that have lots of logic. The other question that is completely open is, we don't know what humans do, right? It would be perfect if we could map human answers in there. But frankly, I think that humans would borderline with that, because we increase information about this environment and maybe do exactly that. Now, let's take another look at this. Let's take a look from the fitness landscape perspective. We wanted to evolve heuristic because it sounded like something special, that's something we have to do, some ability we should have, right? Well, in our fitness landscape, the highest dot in the fitness landscape is the actual solution, and as such, I have enough computational or brain power to do that. I'm not I'm not limited. So the top guy cannot be a heuristic. The lowest guy here, the one that has no answer, should actually be not one because he has as good as a chance, but there's the random guessing heuristic, so technically that is a heuristic. Everything else qualifies as a heuristic because it happens under bounded rationality. The thing doesn't have the capability to do the solution, to arrive at the solution. So, everything is a heuristic. That seems counterintuitive because suddenly, we wanted to evolve heuristics and now we realize everything is one. Okay? Oh, okay, bad ones. But now suddenly we talk about good and bad heuristics and not about the fact that we evolve things. On top of that, if you look at this, I have a hard time calling this a heuristic. This is just a machine that does one particular thing, and we evolved 200 of them.
Algorithm.
It's an algorithm, but okay, be that as it is, this doesn't feel like heuristic. That's how I write this, okay? But I mean, feeling has nothing to do with science, but whatever. Now, on top of that, I made these guys that implement actual heuristics, and we would call these guys machines that implemented particular heuristics. So these guys are true heuristics. My guys are or are not. I don't really know. This all boils down to the following problem. Oh, by the way, and take the best and tell heuristics in this environment don't even evolve. Right? I mean, my strategies evolve to something completely else. Sorry, these brains evolve to something completely else. And the moment you start evolving these things, they go away from that. What right do they have to be there, so to speak? I mean, from my perspective, right? So something is missing. Oh yeah, Simpson character is missing. This illustrates my point, hopefully as good as it gets, because you expected a Simpsons guy to be. You observed what I did. You came up with the Simpson heuristic, right? Blue slide meaning Simpson guy, right? So all of our work, I guess, culminates in this thing. It's not the heuristic that's interesting. It is the machine that arrived at the heuristic. Because the heuristic Simpsons to be expected, or do this in the German city environment, is almost boring. But the ability to arrive at this heuristic is what is so interesting. Okay? So, that's the end of this talk. Wow. thanks to Dave, who started working with us on this and then sort of did something else. Maybe he knew that we're pursuing heuristics rather than machines to do this. And of course, thanks to Tim for all his support in this. Thank you.
Questions, anyone? So the heuristics that you evaluated and compared your evolved solution to were ones in which the input string contained data on all of the cues.
Yes.
But of course, things like the recognition heuristic and some of these others, the decision maker, namely the person that's being challenged with this, doesn't even have data. So they are forced to guess in some sense, right?
Yes.
Because they don't know the Q values for
like real people in this environment.
Right, right. So how would you deal with that?
You turn this around and ask Tim, how does psychology deal with that? I mean, obviously, in order to solve what you just said, this particular problem, you can come up with a heuristic. You can say, okay, choose the city I know because most likely that's better. That's the reason why Brits actually perform better in the German city test than Germans. Because that's technically the better heuristic.
Right. And in fact, the recognition heuristic is at the front end of the take the best heuristic.
The
way psychologists have designed this take the best heuristic is what they've done is put the recognition heuristic as the front end of the take the best and say, okay, if you recognize one, just go. But if you recognize both, then you drop into the take the best.
But sort of to touch on that, the goal was here to simulate this memory querying mechanism, and that postulates that you have full information. It's just how you arrive at a solution. I mean, of course, if I personally think about Bremen or Kassel, I'm not at least consciously going through all these things and evaluating this. But that doesn't mean that I'm not doing this unconsciously or that there's some kind of weighting. And some of these heuristics that are there actually have similar patterns to what humans do. If you ask people, then some of them indeed do take the best heuristic, or at least their answer pattern is consistent with take the best heuristic, and some of them isn't. I mean, still, I would love to see, but in this particular aspect. And on top of that, that's the other part. Since this information maximization heuristic, or whatever you want to call this principle, that actually leads you from no answer to the actual answer, because if you maximize mutual information between these things, you arrive at the perfect solution, right? I think that people will also align with this axis somehow. It's just it wasn't tested. Okay?
It's like, for example, you could make the game where you give the people the clues and the answer to them, and say, based on this, make a decision.
Right.
That's
I mean,
Or you could put noise on the cues that you feed to the Markov brains,
Yeah.
the other way around too, to simulate humans not knowing.
true.
Or
So
even
I think-
thinking they know and being wrong.
Yeah, also one of the other things, and this is something that I'm kind of curious about, is if we train these brains with, let's say, only 70 of these cities, how will they behave when they encounter a different city, right? It's entirely possible that they have these recognition cues in there that just says, I don't know, or that they just take the traits from the city and just compute with what they find. I don't know what that will result in. And on top of that, it's entirely possible that if you have such a noisy environment where, let's say, all the time half of them evolves, you evolve a much more different heuristic, okay? But, I mean, this again touches to this process. It says it's not so important what heuristic is in the end, it's more the machine that does this that arrives at the heuristic is interesting. That's why we want to play around with evolution expertise.
Arend, you said, okay, go ahead.
So maybe, I think you kind of just touched on here with actually trying to have high success rate on data you haven't trained on. But I also wonder what might happen if you give some sort of fitness penalty for the size of the brain. So clearly if you have an incredibly complex algorithm that either takes a lot of computational time or a lot of energy in the biological system.
So there is some kind of implicit fitness penalty for large brains, because the larger, in this case, because the larger the brain is, the higher your mutational robustness has to be, because you have so many more sites which can just screw you over. But at the same time, if you have lots and lots of genes, you can make something really, really redundant. So it's sort of in there, but I mean, you're right. I mean, we can't try to penalize this explicitly. We try to play around with bound rationality. We said, okay, we have less and less and less and less internal states. We have less and less and less time steps to do this. For example, the tallying heuristic takes, I think, 14 time steps to come to the conclusion. Take the best needs, I think, 10. And if we just evolve guys with 2 time ticks, they still arrive at fairly high fitness. So time and internal nodes is what we will play around with, but there's more in that, definitely.
So you said that you didn't know what heuristics these evolved brains are using, but then on the other side you said, look, they have these informational cues and they're maximizing, you know, the joint information in these cues. And do you have any information about whether they are first, you know, using the one with the highest information, you know, in the early part of evolution, and realize that 7 and 6 together, you know, give them more, and then realize that 7, 6, and 1 gives more? And could it be that if you run it long enough, they will find a 4th cue that together has the highest joint information?
Yeah. So there's one caveat though. It is evolution that selects these machines that integrate more into information. This machine is just exploiting this phenomenon. It's a little bit chicken and egg problem here.
Well, but you know, to some extent, what you have determined is that clues 7, 6, and 1 have the highest information together, jointly.
Yes.
And then, if you're saying that this is a machine, you know, what heuristics are they using? You know, they're using the heuristics is I'm going to query the clues with the highest joint information, not selectively one after the other, the ones with the, you know, each highest information.
Yes, true, but this guy is not making a choice of any sort. This thing is not, so to speak, taking one and then the other one. Whatever.
In particular, 7 is not even in this guy.
This guy, no.
So this is
I'm sorry. This is if you do too much programming, then Q0 and suddenly exists. So they are all set up by 1. So this is Q7. It's Q1 to 9, and we use Q0 to 8. Yeah.
Just one note, right? So one interesting thing out of this is in psychology, everyone has gravitated towards using the validity, which is predicting accuracy and not mutual information or that. And so that's quite interesting, at least from a viewpoint to like psychologists would say, this is the adaptive thing, you want to maximize accuracy.
Right.
So this is kind of
Right,
flipping on
no,
the head.
fitness is information.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I'm not sure if we did that, but this guy here, the highest fittest guy, I think you can arrive at if you order the cues by mutual information over the thing. So if you would order the cues not by logical validity, discrimination rate, success rate, but by mutual information about the answer, then I think you would end up having this. I'm not super sure if that's true.
But yeah.
Okay,
Roughly.
So using mutual information is already also a very good way to sort these guys.
Arend, could you explain those terms?
Oh yeah.
You want me to give it a shot?
Yeah, you can do
Alright,
that.
so ecological validity is so if you have a Q that has a 1 or a 0 and discriminates, so it's the probability of correctly making a choice given the Q discriminates. Okay? And discrimination rate is just the overall rate of it picking an answer. And so then that's it. So those are the two that actually psychologists have focused on. In fact, they've only focused on the validity and really toned down, not even focused on the discrimination rate. So that would be.
So I'm going to give you a more intuitive situation here. Berlin is the capital, right? And one of the cues is, are you the capital or not? The capital is the biggest city, but you can use this cue exactly in one situation when you compare to Berlin. In all other cases, it's irrelevant. It's extraordinarily accurate, but it's useless in most of the cases. Now, where do you weigh for? Do you weigh for precision or do you weigh for applicability? And these heuristics or these measures give you a weigh these different things. That's the background.
So capital means capital of the whole country or
Yeah.
capital of the
Yes,
state?
state capital are at different rates. They have state capitals as
Yeah,
well.
state capitals, yeah.
Data set. On top of that, there's almost redundant because if you have a number plate with a single letter, most likely the U are the state capital. And that's another cue. So they are highly redundant sometimes, and sometimes they're almost entirely.
So just to go back to the initial question I asked about, complete, versus incomplete data sets, and this recognition heuristic that's been identified as one where people might, as you said, people from England do better at this because the recognition heuristic is what they're using in it. But what that suggests is the recognition heuristic works because it's correlated. The cue that it's based on the fact that you've heard the word is probably because there's a soccer team, or because it's a capital, or it's related to one of those other
train, and therefore you know of the train station.
Yeah, exactly. So it may be that the recognition heuristic is actually a window onto deeper level kinds of things, and not something that should be reified unto itself.
There's going to be 3 of us presenting this time. I'm Randy Olson. This is David Phillips, and Arend is he wanted to talk more. So we might go, since we're starting a little late, we might go a little over time. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So anyway, today we're going to talk about this is more education and outreach that we're doing here instead of evolution of behavior. And so today we're going to talk about a video game that we've been working on in the lab called Evolve and Conquer. And we're hoping to be able to use this video game to teach evolution. So let's get into it. So this is partially what inspired the idea behind this, is this graph. And this graph shows belief in evolution, if you want to use a better word than belief, whatever, in the US. And so what we see here is...
Just data Gallup?
Yes, this is a Gallup poll.
This is the Gallup poll.
Oh.
Okay.
So as we can see here, almost half the U.S. population doesn't even believe in evolution at all. Roughly a third believes that there's God-guided evolution, and then a very small, about 10% over the last 30 years, actually believe in Darwinian evolution. And so, tangentially related to that, and also motivating this, is that teachers have had a lot of trouble teaching science in the classroom and everything like that, and so they've turned to other methods to do this. And one is going to informal education, which is more you want to engage the student in some kind of experiment or task. So you give them a problem and you solve it with them. You interact and you experiment and you come up with hypotheses. How do you solve this? And so they think that this will be a much better way of teaching a student, because the student is actively involved in the learning process rather than just sitting there and getting lectured to, like I'm lecturing to you guys right now. So maybe I should have designed this as a problem that we could solve as a group now. So anyway, computer games actually turn out to be a perfect way to do this. And so I stole this directly from a paper. And basically what they said is that games enable learners to see and interact with representations of natural phenomena that would otherwise be impossible to observe. In our case, evolution.
On large time scales.
Yes, on large time scales, yes. And additionally, if you've worked with anyone my age or a teenager nowadays, we're very impatient and we want feedback now. And games do that. They provide the rapid feedback rather than a week or two later. Rather than feedback from an exam a week or two later. And also it can...
Or from a referee 2 or 3 months later.
Yeah, that's fun. And also it can motivate them to learn by providing constantly new challenges to face. So here's a couple success stories of this kind of method. There is this website out there called Yville that I guess preteens like to go on and play, and they build avatars, and by completing learning events, they can actually get items for their character or customize their character more. They get to build up a character and they get invested in this character. And so some, crazy person was like, hey, let's do an experiment with them and let's release this disease called YPOX on them. And so I think this was just another challenge. But again, this is more of the active learning, right? Here's a problem, And so we're going to unleash this disease called Y-pox on them. It affects their character. I don't remember exactly what it did, but I imagine since they're young kids, yeah, it probably wasn't too traumatizing. Hopefully. But what they found was they provided hints and clues to the kids on how they can possibly find out how this disease started and how to prevent it from spreading and how to make it go away from their character. And the biggest thing about this is that it made that problem personally meaningful to them because it was affecting their character, it was affecting them. So they wanted to figure out, okay, I've got to learn this thing to get past this. And so this is something that video games can offer us. Another success story is a video game made by the US Army, funded directly by the US Army, called America's Army. It was released in 2002, and it's been pretty successful. 7 years ago, 3 years after it was released, it already had 5 million downloads, and it's still being actively developed today. In 2012, they're making the third iteration of America's Army.
They keep secret about how many downloads they have.
Yeah, which is strange. And basically what this game does is it allows the players to experience what it's like to be in America's Army. It teaches, it highly focuses on the core values of the Army, you know, never abandon your comrades and yada yada. And it gives, obviously I haven't played it in depth. This is why. Anyway, it gives players a feel for what it's like in Army life. And so, you know, they can have it where you have a GPS and you report the coordinates to other players who have to, you know, coordinate an airstrike or something like that. 4 years ago, MIT did a study on this, and they found that 30% of the 16 to 24-year-olds that had played this game had a more positive view of the Army, simply because they played this game. And then on top of that, this has actually been the most successful recruiting effort by really any of the armed forces that was actually a purposeful recruiting effort. You know, the only one that was more successful was maybe Top Gun, but this wasn't directly funded by the military, so it happened to work out really well for them as far as recruiting. And so what you want to note about this is that with this game, they didn't really purposely try to teach the Army. They let you experience it and thereby hopefully learn about the Army. So basically what I'm proposing here is we need to make a Beacon version of America's Army. Maybe Beacon's Army, so and the idea behind this game is that it allows people to experience evolution in action on a scale that we can observe. You know, because if we look at it, you know, like gravity, if anyone here says they don't believe in gravity, everyone will laugh at them because everyone can experience gravity. But evolution, on the other hand, you know, sure, I would say the majority of us believe in evolution because we can experience it firsthand, but it's not easy to. So we want to make that possible with this video game. And so with that, I'm going to pass this over to Arend and David, who have been actively working on this video game.
Rather than just planning.
Yeah.
Or coming up with it. So, okay, let's call it Beacon's Army game, should allow the player to experience evolution in action. I mean, that's our mission statement, right? Experience evolution in action. This is a deliberate choice because you want the public to understand that we are studying at something that's actually happening, right? So, how to do that, and well, we look at the demographics to see what type of game you should make in order to be successful. And the largest genre, and this is the 2011 report of the Entertainment Software Association, they have all these demographics, and this is, of course, the 2011 report is about 2010. Okay, in 2010, the biggest genre was the strategy genre. 1/3 of the market is in strategy game. The second one is role playing, and the rest is casual. Tons of different things. Okay, so that also resonates very well with the cells in 2010, because all the games that are red are explicit real-time strategy games, and everything that's orange on this list is having some component in strategy in real time. Okay? So extraordinarily big genre and extraordinarily successful. Okay? So that means you should rather make a real-time strategy or some kind of strategy. And the cool thing is strategy games have this subgenre, which is called the 4X strategy subgenre, which has these 4 key elements: explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. that perfectly aligns with what we understand as ecology, right? It just so happens, right? I mean, it's natural, whatever. The thing is, explore means, of course, you forage, you roam around, you explore your environment as an animal to find new thing or whatever. If you expand, of course, you radiate species, you become higher numbers. Exploitation, of course, everything is interesting the moment resources are limited. Right? Obviously, exploitation is important. And exterminate actually nails it because, of course, survival of the fittest, or the fact that you can only live in a niche with one species, means that you have to exterminate the other to survive. Right? So the fittest nails this point. So apparently this is really prone to what we try to do. So let's not do Beacon's army, let's do what we call Evolve and Conquer. There is a real-time strategy game called Command and Conquer, so we probably cannot use Evolve and Conquer as the name, but it gets the message, the question of what we want to do. So let me briefly show you what we want to show here. The genre, of course, is a 4x real-time strategy game that you play alone or hopefully with multiplayers. The mechanism or the rules of this game should incorporate or instantiate evolution. So you have to have inheritance, variation, natural selection. And as a consequence, you should be able to experience survival of the fittest. And then you have a theme and a story narrative. I want to show you something, so we came up with a theme and a story narrative, but keep in mind that the story and the narrative and the theme are independent of mechanisms and the genre. I can change the mechanism independent of the genre, and change the theme. I can make this a Christmas game for all I care, right? But I'm going to show you something, so let me explain to you what our theme and story right now is. So there's a planet millions of light years away. You cannot go there as humans. So you still would like to have it or explore it. So what do? You send robots. Well, robots can't deal with the vagaries of whatever happens there. So instead of sending robots, you send a robot factory. And at this robot factory produce robots in an evolving fashion, because we know evolution is perfect and dealing with all these vagaries. And then, of course, your mission is to explore, expand, exploit, exterminate, or maybe even coexist with whatever you find. And of course, the hang up here is you will experience resources, terrains, flora, fauna, as I said, aliens, and what will the future bring? Your mission is to conquer this thing. And again, if you don't like extraterrestrial things, think of this as a filler. This is just a theme which you can change. But again, what we're going to do, or what we did, is we used Unity to create this game. Unity is a commercial 3D game engine that produced, or that allowed people to produce thousands of other games. It's, I think in its first instance, it's really successful. And one of the main reasons to do this is it's cross-platform. I design a game once, and then I can compile and distribute this on every known platform currently available. So PCs, Macs, of course, Linux, iPhone, consoles, mobile devices, webs, you name it, you can release the game on that. So we don't have this, Mac-only problem. On top of that, Unity provides a full, quotation mark, physics environment. I mean, not quantum physics, but what you need in a game, right? And that's supported by NVIDIA physics, which means that physics is crazy fast, and current technology supports all what we want to do. And by the way, we use Unity already through science, and some of all the simulations are done in Unity. So this is not completely foreign to us. Let me introduce you to the nanobot. The nanobot is your unit. You control these nanobots and these robots. And of course, they have nice textures, and this is how this guy would look in the real environment. Now, you're not controlling one nanobot, you're controlling an army, or should I say a population of nanobots. And you can move them around, you can have them attack stuff, you can use them to gather resources, and these guys spawn also. And these guys hopefully implement, the entire mechanisms of evolution.
Alright, so I'm David, and I'm going to be showing you in-game demonstrations of these mechanics at work. So this is our nanobot, and he's selected, indicated with the blue ring. Now I'm right-clicking to have him move around the environment. So he is gathering these green resource cubes, and these can be whatever. They can be minerals, elements found in the environment, whatever. But the whole point of them is that they will eventually let you reproduce. And you can tell he's moving between these craters, so he's pathfinding without getting stuck in them, which is very useful having large armies of nanobots going through very complex terrains. So we'll just finish this out for the next one. Yeah, just moving that.
He's not getting stuck in the crater.
Yeah. So you did a pretty good job on that obstacle course right there. So this next one is physical interactions with the environment. Now in this demonstration there's boxes that have physics affected on them, that are affected by physics. So when these nanobots run into them, they can push them over. But we can change the mass of these boxes, we can change the size, we can make one large nanobot that can push over a whole bunch of boxes, or you can make a whole bunch of small ones that swarm. So this would be great later on for setting up like almost physics like traps, so maybe a wall of boxes that you must go through. But you can also think, we can add a whole bunch of stuff. We can add wind, like if they go into a wind zone, they get blown, or if they go over fire, they get burned, or even if boxes fall on them, they get crushed. You can do all that. So this is showing spawning offspring. So he's going to get 3 resources, which is the limit to reproduce, and every time he does 3, he spawns a new guy, which is indicated by this spawn bar.
I mean, you can't imagine anything here. Like, he can build this thing, he would lay an egg, whatever. We said he's sort of beamed in.
And you can also select multiple ones at once and have them on. And you can select selection if you want.
And to clarify, this is all done by the player. The player controls the unit. The player tells it to use the resources, and the player tells it to reproduce. So they're in control.
Alright, so now this one actually the player is able to do a command called populate, which allows the nanobot to gather resources by himself and spawn by himself. So the main thing this is demonstrating is inheritance, which is the larger nanobots are producing larger nanobots. Small ones are producing smaller ones. Now large ones happen to be faster, so you can see them gaining more resources and spawning more, which if this were an actual demonstration of the game, they would be the dominant species, probably win. So we just showed you inheritance, check mark. And so we're also going to talk about variability and selection. Alright, so this is variability. So these guys have a high mutation rate, and what's happening is they're able to spawn more and more and more, and you can see there's small ones and large ones. You get any amount of units spawn. Yeah, there's a large one, there's a little small one down there, and this is showing as a group pathfinding. So
what David showed you is size variation, right? I mean, you have a certain size and you have produce offspring with a certain variability and that follows some kind of distribution. But size is just one property. Maybe we want to have tons of other traits or properties. Health, armor, speed, sizes and their strength, you name it. There are lots and lots of variables that influence the gameplay and how you succeed in managing this. Or maybe heat resistance or reproduction rate or how you deal with resource and all those things. So you have to encode this somehow. Well, that was Joey's job actually, to write the genome for these things. Because of course if you want to have evolution you need some kind of genome, and the genome should code for these traits. First point is the genome should be human comprehensible. The layman should be able to look at it and get an intuitive understanding of what this genome means. It shouldn't be cryptic ACGs with a genetic code or something, it should be something more intuitive. Well, it should of course make evolutionary sense, it should implement genetics mechanisms. Well, it should allow for dependent and independent traits because then it starts to run interesting. And this is for the expert, there should be negative and positive epistasis in there. And the worst part for Joey is I said, well, I know what I need now, it's speed, strength, and so forth, but I know later I will ask you for other things. So please come up with something that deals with my vagaries and my expectations later. This is the worst specification as a designer. Joey did it. So the genome that we have is human readable because it's a sequence of letters. They are lowercase or capital case letters. Okay. Now, if you would like to have know something about a parameter, let's say size, then for each of these parameters you have a code. Currently, the code that we're using is identical to the name of the parameter. You look through your string and you count how often you find lowercase s, I, z, and e, and how often you find uppercase s, I, z, and e's. The uppercase letters are positive traits, and you accumulate over the positive letters, and the lowercase letters are negative traits. In this case, you find more positive than, you find more capital letters than lowercase letters. That means that this thing is bigger than the norm. On top of that, we always start on the trait with 1. That means that if these genomes drift, all these terms return to 1 because you don't have a bias towards lowercase or uppercase letters. If you have another trait, let's say rate, or anything that I can invent here, I just have to find the code and I can read that from the genome. Well, what you see is if we look at, for example, the trait rate, then R, A, T are not incorporated in S, I, Z, and E, but the letter E is, which means that there's some kind of combination between these two traits. You can choose another code that makes it independent, but in this particular case, it's dependent. We implemented all sorts of genetic mechanisms, point mutations, insertions, deletions, you name it. If you have 2 genomes you want to mate, you need some kind of crossover. Because they're haploid, there's no recombination, but we could make them couple, there's no problem with that. So I hope we convinced you that we have inheritance and also variability is checked. Okay. David.
Alright, so now I'm going to show you some videos on selection.
Oh, so, yeah.
Oh, and the two videos are going to be birth and death, and I'll explain more when it starts. Alright, so we have a plant, and this plant spawns resources in a random direction, and in this video I'm about to show you there's going to be a field of plants with nanobots that are going to go into that populate mode and start gathering resources and spawning by themselves. So here they are. So there's a small one which you can tell is very fast, and there's a large one which is very slow. And we'll just watch it for a second, and you can see that the small one is going to slowly gather more fat and reproduce more. So the main thing to take away from this right now is that the small one has a faster birth rate, which means it's producing more offspring, and over time will dominate in this landscape. So we're just going to let this play and just watch what happens.
If we would turn on death, these guys would expire at some point, then this would be a full evolutionary simulation.
Chemostat.
Yeah, there's a constant influx rate of resources. There's evolution going on right now. In this particular one, you're not dying. But the moment you die, you will select for the ones that are better.
And by now it's apparent the small guys have taken over.
For some reason it accumulates in the back.
Yeah, they don't go with it.
Well, they have a search radius for the resource it drops. So right now there's more resources in the back, so they're able to find those quicker.
Is there a genetic component for their search pattern, or is that just?
Currently, it's you check in a certain distance radius, which you could make that dependent. You can say search range or something like that, and then you pick the closest one in that search range. You just go to this thing, regardless of other guys go there or not. And that happens. But I mean, I think it's a good point to make this also dependent.
But in the game, they would be controlled by the player, so it's whatever search pattern the player tells them.
I mean, yeah, this one is population one. I mean, there's always this trade-off between micromanaging and micromanaging madness. I mean, yeah, maybe I would like to move all these units under my control, but sometimes you just say, okay, guys, make more. And you just say, go out, forage, populate, and so on. So these are the two things. And these guys are in population, basically hands-off.
All right, before we go to the next slide. Now, just because there's more of these small ones doesn't necessarily mean they'll win a battle, and vice versa. This is what we'll demonstrate this next slide. All right, so we have a group of small ones, and they're going to go against a much stronger opponent. Now, there's two nanobots at the bottom of the same strength, but they're both very powerful. Now, these, you can see that the nanobot is taking these out in one shot, so all the small guys have no chance against this big guy. But now, the other nanobots on the right-hand side over there, they are a little bit stronger, but not quite as strong yet. So they can defeat the nanobot, but they will lose some in the process. And you can see now the rings that are appearing below them is an indicator of their health. So that one's starting to take damage, it's going down, and then when the nanobots die, they drop a resource cube, which is, just your food.
Sometimes
Even smoke, wow.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
So the thing is, these guys spawn much faster. They won in the other environment, and they really lose against this one. So being fast is not necessarily good in all cases. Right?
If you have the ability to kill.
Come on.
Die.
Way over with.
So we won.
So what we showed you is, I mean, first of all, you have a differential fitness in birth. These two things can have different birth rates, and you can have different death rates. So we have some kind of natural selection in here. Because there are these physical constraints, let's say heat resistance, something like that, you could try to evolve guys to be more heat resistant, and the selection to be dominated by these physical constraints. But most importantly, of course, you have a player, and of course, since you can decide as a player who makes offspring and who doesn't, if you want to, you're effectively breeding. So I cannot just say there's natural selection. There are different components in this game. Natural is one of them. You have these selection based on physical constraints, and you have this player choice. But important is that what is favored, or what is demanded, or what gets you to the solution is under the control of whoever makes the level, which we are. So I could make a level where everything depends on the player choice. Pick the right guy to go over there or not. I could make one where physical constraints are important. It doesn't matter what the player really does as long as he doesn't pick the ones that are heat resistant or strong or whatever. Or I can even say put everything in automation and we have some kind of natural process. Okay? So inheritance, variability, and selection, hopefully checking. All of that is what we call this immersion, this indirect teaching approach. You just experience evolution as it goes on, and hopefully you explore it. But there are more opportunities for, let's say, the direct teaching. Since you should conquer this planet somehow, there's probably some kind of campaign, a series of levels that you can go through to finally get this, yeah, you've done it, medal or whatever. Each of these levels can be dedicated to certain principles, and on top of that, you should always have tutorials that explain how the mechanisms work, so how you move units around and so forth. But of course, you can dedicate tutorials to specific questions. How do you deal with low resources? How do you deal with heat? How do you deal with high background radiation? All these kind of things. So that's an option. The next one is we would love to have battles against the computer. So let's say you have a high resource environment, you have a different strategy than if you're low resource environment, maybe you want to deal with inbreeding, depression, whatever. You set up independent levels that don't deal with the campaign. And of course, I guess most interestingly is if I have to use evolution to my advantage to beat somebody else who is also trying to beat me, or, and that's why we have this coexistence there, it's entirely possible that two players have to interact and collaborate with each other in order to achieve a level. Maybe I have strong guys, maybe he has fast guys, and together we have to solve something. So not necessarily always kill the other. Okay? And on top of that, if you have this campaign mode, then of course you want to play through this entire thing. But maybe your evolutionary selection detoured or you can't do that, so you should always have the option to just play from default settings. But of course, through the entire campaign, you would love to see some kind of phylogeny. And I mean, I just use size, but of course, there are many, many dimensions where this evolves. And a single level only provides you some subsection of this. But of course, if you can carry over your units into the, or your army into the next level and so forth, then you can evolve this tree further in the next level and so forth. You can get this entire phylogeny over this entire course of the game. Okay? Now, is this fun? Yes, hopefully. I mean, our prototype will tell this. But our main question right now is, and we can't test this without the prototype, is does this game change how evolution is perceived? And do you actually perceive evolution through this game? On our website, we have demos. I mean, we actually are about to upload a demo. But if you have feedback about these demos, please drop them at that website. And of course, in our demo, we have different alien races, new objects. So please go there, download this, play this, and give feedback about that. So we are sort of done with this. I'm overdrawing tremendously. When we discuss, keep in mind that these 4 cues are independent of each other. Okay? So if you don't like spider bots, it doesn't mean that evolution doesn't work. It just means that you don't like spider bots. Okay? Thank you.
So one worry is,
Only one.
well, maybe the biggest worry is that this could reinforce people's preconceptions about intelligent design.
Yeah.
So there's going to be an impulse, because this is the way a lot of other games work, I hear, because I just don't play games, but that you could provide your bot with a capability, right? Now, even if you use artificial selection, I mean, there's nothing wrong with using artificial breeding, but that, frankly, is a kind of artificial design, of intelligent design. You're just using, you know, a selection process, but you're shaping the environment to steer evolution in a particular direction. So, on one level, that's okay, because that, after all, was the analogy that Darwin used to help people understand natural selection. But if people kind of get in their head that this is the way evolution works in general, you know, there is a school of thought out there, theistic evolution, where God's the intelligent designer and he's using a Darwinian process to steer things towards a preordained solution. So how do you guard against that?
The thing is, I mean, that's yeah, I guess the biggest concern, because it is our biggest concern. If you allow the player to influence this entire process that goes beyond just watching a simulation,
right?
What happens? How much do you corrupt this mechanism? That's why at least 2 of these things, inheritance is easy, but variability is uncontrollable by the player. I mean, I've looked at tons of other evolution games and what is out there. And there's one thing that all of these implementations do wrong, and that is most mutations are beneficial, and this is not the case here. You can't just let these guys drift for all I care. Or you can specifically say, oh, I want to go smaller now or bigger. So that's not under your control, and you have to do this.
But it's really the selection part that is.
At least some part of the selection part is. And at the same time, you can of course observe what your opponent does. And, I mean, we're not setting up the opponent to be some kind of intelligent designer or whatever. We can let just the opponent spawn offspring, and you fighting the opponent will actually shape the opponent to be better against you. So at least the opponent, the AI part of it, will experience non-intelligent design, right? At least
Blind watchmaker.
so, I mean, there is, I mean, you're right, there is this trade-off. This is, I mean, unavoidable, but at least we try to minimize that as much as possible. There's one other add-on to this. You could think of the, what do we call that? The genetics add-on, so to speak, that you could download. Of course, these are just strings. And I mean, what we are doing when we set up the levels is hacking on these genomes saying, we have a big guy, he needs a lot of H's, right? Yeah, so we designed this, but I mean, of course, you can make this transparent to the player. You can say, by the way, you can genetically in lineages, you can actually really hack into the genome, but keep in mind that this is not evolution. This is deliberate manipulation. This is design.
Right. But it turns out, you know, from the experience of teaching evolution with Avida, to have both the people watching evolution and then giving them control over the genetics, where they're going like, look, I can actually engineer stuff, and then you see, well, it's actually not that easy, and the evolution solution is actually better than what I can do. Where, you know, you get these little notes scribbled at 3 a.m. Now I understand it, now I will never doubt evolution anymore, because of this capacity to see the genome and see, you know, the evolutionary process did this, and I can't really do it that way.
No, I was going to raise that as a counter argument to my concern, because if the problem is hard enough, you might not be able to conceive of the intelligently designed solution. And yet, if it's, but you know, this is a game designer's problem. You still want it to be possible to be discoverable without everybody just croaking, right?
And my concern about it is that most of the games have some problem-solving element. That is, you find the solution to whatever it is, whether it's a strategy against another player, whatever. I'm just wondering about keeping their interest if all they have to do is just turn evolution loose on it and walk away from it, come back, and then...
Oh no, but they're supposed to conquer. You know, they have a goal.
They have a goal. So imagine this like the classic StarCraft game or something like that, where there is an opponent, you have to defeat him and so forth. If you just wait and let it run, well, then you have your two population, nothing really happens. You have to make strategic decisions. You have to say, go here, exploit this, go over there, forage. So, I mean, sort of one of the advantages is, imagine you turn this into hands-off mode and it evolves. Well, perfect, then you actually observe that evolution works. And maybe we set up levels where this is a successful strategy. Maybe we set up the levels where this is not a successful strategy, where you have to interact.
I'll give you a typical example of a level, okay? Suppose that there's lots of guys trying to exploit an area, and you know, there's just no more food, okay? But then you realize that there's this whole area full of stuff, but you can't get there because there's only like this little opening to your world. And you realize, well, you know, I need smaller guys, okay? Because if I do, I can populate this, nobody else is there, and I'll be the winner. And then so you're going to try to breed, you know, as much as you can until you get at least one small guy. You go through, you have got your, you know, event, and then you start, and you can do this not just with small things. You can make this, there's a very windy area, okay, so you have to figure out a way how to be able to not be blown away, so you have to evolve better attachment or something like that. So you can figure out that there's lots of areas with different resources, and you have to figure out how can I be the first one that can actually take advantage of that resource. And that maybe through pleiotropy and all kinds of, and maybe only epistasis is going to get you there at some point. And that's the beauty of having to create these levels where people suddenly understand, aha, I can't just maximize the one thing because it screws me up on the other. I actually have to sort of, you know, get some combination, and at some point I'll be able to exploit that resource.
So one of the things that we found before, though, with misconceptions that students have could be exacerbated by that type of approach, right? The common misconception, one of the common misconceptions is that, well, the Lamarckian view, that there is something there to be needed, right? And evolution happens because we need it, right? So if the goal of the level turns out to be something where I've got to figure out how to achieve that need, right? I've got to be really careful that it's not done in a way that it makes, or that it reinforces that misconception. Right?
But I mean,
that's the danger with something where each level has a goal that requires some need to be fulfilled. Then you start thinking evolution happens because there's a need
But if there's simply a scoring mechanism and that each level your goal is to maximize your score, the individuals who manage to get to the unused resources are going to maximize.
Right, but the way it was described was you need to be small to get through the whole hole.
No, I mean, you're making that thing, but then you realize that it doesn't happen, on the lifetime of a player. It only goes through generations of breeding, and you very quickly get a sense of, I get a distribution, and I have to try many times, and by luck, some will be small. By luck, I just have to do many, and these are the ones that I'm going to use for my next generation and just send them through.
So it's not really Lamarckian, but it is reminiscent of this sort of Raelians who claim that spacemen came to Earth every few million years and tweaked the evolutionary process to juice the progress toward us, right? So that's, there's not many people who, that's not a common but there is a school of thought. There are people who believe that. They're called Raelians.
Yes. That we know that is already great, right? But the point is here that, of course, you can create an environment that is conducive for some trait, right?
Right.
So that is not unnatural, that is actually fairly natural. But the point is, imagine I just have my population and I hope for the small one. That's less effective than looking at my distribution, picking out my small ones, getting rid of the rest, and then breeding with the small ones because their distribution is hopefully smaller and so forth. And this just recapitulates this specific trait. It's just that I have to impose the selection pressure by myself. The important difference is that I as a player cannot say, make small guys. That's impossible. This within genetic engineering, it's not impossible, but as a game mechanism, you cannot do that. So, if you want to be successful in this level, you have to use evolution. That's the core point here, so to speak. That's the best possible case.
At the same time, of course, we're also hoping to have an assessment, done, before and after, so we can test whether these concepts have.
And that's one of the big things that we would definitely like feedback on today is how would be the best way to assess how this game would change people's views of it.
So I think the first thing you need to do is to separate acceptance from understanding of evolution, because the graph that you put up there at the very beginning is really acceptance of evolution. And I think that what you want to get at is understanding of evolution. And I think that those are two really different components of what we do here and what you want to be measuring. And so I think that going after what people already understand about evolution is important, as opposed, because I think you're not gonna. My guess is you're not gonna even address any of that. You might.
Yeah, the goal certainly isn't to disprove anyone's beliefs regarding religion or anything else. It's just to allow people to experience and understand evolution and how it works.
Hopefully play around with it.
Yeah, and hopefully have fun too. It's a game after all.
I don't know.
Just a comment in terms of, so you start off your discussion by comparing this belief in God versus evolution. And, those things aren't completely inseparable. And I think the problem here is that your player is automatically a God because he's omnipotent, he can see everything on the playing field, he can make choices. And
it's not omnipotent.
But if he can make choices and he's also choosing for the thing that's evolving, then how is that real evolution? Doesn't the player, since a player is a God, doesn't the God need to be the environment like it would be in a natural evolution setting? I don't see how, if you had an obstacle like your craters, that it had to learn its way how to get around craters. As a God, as a player, I'm just going to be smart enough to never send it through the craters. I'm going to always subvert whatever environmental obstacle it would have to face. And so I don't see how you can have player control and evolution of something that's player controlled at the same time.
Two things. First of all, you aren't omnipotent. That's impossible in this environment because there are things that are not deliberately under the player's control. So you have limited powers. The second thing is, just take the situation right now as it is called reality, okay? We experience evolution. At the same time, we as humans interact in this world and employ selective forces. We domesticate animals, we provide environments, we destroy environments, we see things change. just because we act in this environment as humans doesn't destroy evolution.
So my comparison is, so like, we live in this environment, and one way that God is so consistent with that environment is he created the universe, but not that he's like directing my actions and what I'm saying right now. And I'm saying in your game, the God would be directing my actions and doing what I'm doing right now.
But I think that gets back to the point that we're not trying to disprove any beliefs. We're not trying to touch the God subject. That's
well, I'm just saying in terms of where.
I'm
just saying in terms of where the evolution happens.
Right.
So the only God character would be, in fact, the game designer, not the person playing.
But in that, I mean.
Well, I mean, the thing is that you can offer this a lot by the narrative, right? I mean, what we would say is, hey, you are this, AI or whatever sent to this planet to control these things, and your mission is to control these robots, which is an impersonation. You always play some kind of character, and we just make sure that you don't feel too godlike. Maybe that's a common.
But so now, if the game designer, let's say, is the God, then doesn't that just mean that the game designer is the thing that's evolving the player? Like the game designer has created these obstacles, telling the player what to do. The player can figure out however they want to do it, but the player is not really evolving those nanobots. It's the game designer that has evolved whatever path the player decides.
Yeah, I mean, this is this. So imagine you breed cows, right? Well, you're breeding cows, whoever does that, right? At the same time, the cows evolve in the farmer's breeding environment. This is not opposing each other. The cows actually evolve. They are not evolving. It's just it's an awkward environment where, quotation mark, pleasing the farmer is good. I mean, having traits that the farmers like. So that is, after all, a natural environment. It's just one that we as humans perceive as a-natural because we make it. But it's not. It remains a natural environment. And this is something that you cannot get out of that situation because we are part of this world. I mean, you can say,
by the same token, when a flower evolves under influence of a pollinator's behavior, that doesn't make the pollinator a god.
That's right.
But the pollinator's choices are exerting selection on. So in general, I'm fine with this idea that this artificial selection is an evolutionary process. But it seems like you have to have these conceptual protections in there so that people don't start to think that they're too all-powerful. There have to be these constraints in how.
And I mean, the thing is, if you think about how you would set up these things in terms of tutorials, right? I mean, the first one is how do you move these guys around whatsoever, and then you would have a tutorial that talks about inheritance. Hey, you can make offspring, right? And then you have the next one that talks about variability. You literally have a narrator or some kind of a visual representation that says, do this, follow this. This is something that we explain to you. And if you want, we can make a you aren't a god tutorial.
Or just a genetics tutorial would be sufficient.
Yeah, just try to get these guys fly. You can, right? So that you experience your limitedness. I mean, I get the fear quotation mark, and I think it's a good point. But I'm saying we can address that.
So there's this inherent tension in these sorts of cases, and we found this in development for Beta as well, right? But for every point that you allow player interaction and control, right, you're moving it from the automatic way in which evolution happens, right? And Darwin made use of that as well, as you pointed out, right? As a stepping stone to understanding how natural selection worked, you use artificial selection. But in the end, you pull that out, right, and then you let it happen automatically. So that's the goal we want to get to. And for Beta Ed, what we wound up doing was actually sort of locking things down. That once the environment is set up, literally you cannot make any changes, so that anything that happens until had to have been that. Right? So here, to make it a game, though, this is the sense in which the game has some inherent tension in it. To make it a game, you want to interact. You want to feel the way you motivated this at the beginning, that it's happening to you, right? You have a level to be solved, right? To make it work as a game, the tension there is that you want to be the one to do it, right? So I think that's going to be trickiness. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's going to be really tricky to sort of lead through the steps so that you don't introduce these sorts of misconceptions. It's going to be very easy to do.
Yeah, it actually made me have a very good idea, I guess, and that is, your campaign branches out, right? You don't necessarily have to follow this one line of narrative, right? You could do this. And what you just said is, in the end, you take away control. It is entirely possible to make a design that says, you just take the guys that you evolve and run them in an uninteractive environment, right? Just let them do it, let's just watch them. And if you win the game, you have to also win the non-interacting end, because you set up the thing when you evolve to the point where they can deal on themselves. Or you play around with these level of interaction, you say, okay, let's not breathe for a moment, or let's not have mutation rate. Or what we have as the opposite of this is we have radioactive barrels, right? These radioactive barrels crazily increase the mutation rate. We should not breathe next to them. That's the punchline. But I mean, you can't play around with these things. And I guess it's a good idea to say, let's also pursue the path where you take out more and more, what you just said, because it makes a great level, by the way.
Yeah, I think this is the solution, is to create these environments in such a way that to succeed, a sequence of adaptations has to happen. But you can't control each of those steps. You, as the player, might be able to set up maybe the distribution, maybe the mutation rates, maybe this, maybe that, maybe you could tinker with the genome, and then you let it run, see how you do, and and then a sequence of things might or might not happen, and there needs to be some sort of reward that, wow, these initial conditions led to a pretty productive sequence, but it's clear to them they didn't steer it along each step of that way, or I mean that's where the narrative would have to be really carefully constructed.
And I think there are a couple of papers by Ross Neame at Ohio State where he really looks at sort of how people constructed their knowledge of evolution, and so like the loss of traits is people have a much harder time with the loss of traits than the gaining of traits. And if you give them a scenario, they really have a hard time with that. So incorporating some of those challenges, so that maybe there has to be a loss of a trait in order to move forward in the game. Right, exactly. And so I think that if you can incorporate some of the steps along the way that he's already tested, and then you can use some of his assessments to actually get at whether the game is actually moving forward.
What if you have a rational player playing like they would in Command and Conquer against an evolving opponent, such that in order to beat the evolving opponent, you eventually need to understand how it's evolving so that you can manipulate its evolution in your favor.
Yeah, one of the things that, I mean, that's more of a metaphor, that's sort of underlying hope here, is you have to design some kind of AI component, right? You have to design the opponent strategy. Now, since evolution already takes care of how your units are distributed, in theory you could just retain a pool of organisms on one end of the level and just send guys over. If you see that one of these guys is very successful against your opponent, you just let that guy breed. So you can use evolution to guide your AI, right? Because I mean, inventing an AI is fairly hard, but evolution is on the benefits you get because it already takes care of making your units at least stronger against that particular player. So that's definitely on the AI side present. What you said is, I mean, can you try to outsmart an evolving opponent? That's sort of the other side of this thing. Yeah, I guess that's, that's part of the thing. The question is if you can really understand what's going on. I mean, imagine that you could make it cold in this environment, whereas you fight with flamethrowers or something like that. I mean, just making up stuff, right? But you could rig this. You could make him in his environment particularly vulnerable to what you have as an advantage. That would be something that I would call exploiting his evolution, right? And the nice thing is the physics environment allows you to do these kind of things, right? So usually in a computer game you have to program all of that in, right? Here, because you have this physics environment, this is more or less coming for free. And you still have to set up certain, interaction levels, but still it comes for free. Or let's put obstacles in this environment that his large guys can't move around, right? Suddenly he has to use small guys, and by the way, all got to crush him. I mean, I guess. So the answer is yes, I see options to do that.
Last question. One last question.
What's our
I just wanted to know if you guys had a thought about developing a strategy guide, like exists for several video games, that the strategy guide in itself would not only help players along the campaign, but to elaborate on some of those evolution concepts and include some things.
The direct teaching type of thing.
Yeah, so-
Immersion is one thing, and the other one is, we have a tutorial on tutorials, and I mean,
Like,
you could say.
separate, like, say, not just as you play the campaign, but just so you can understand it in general.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's fairly hard, but in theory you could make players design levels if they want, right? So, I mean, the Vita is there to set up various experiments. In theory, because this is an instance of evolution, you could set up your own experiments. I mean, this is extraordinarily sophisticated, and I don't know if we really want to go there right away, but I mean, I think it's
In year 2 of funding,
this thing is not super easy, but
Year 3?
Finding out if it's fun, for that you need a prototype. We have a prototype and we think it's fun. Immersing players in this and seeing if that has an effect is what we try to do.
Let's thank the players.